Welcome back to another exciting episode here at IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Wes Bryan, and in today's episode, we're continuing through our series in VMware. More specifically, we're looking at the VMware Certified Professional version 6. Joining me back in the studios is none other than Mr. Don Bazette. Don, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, Wes. Ready to jump in and make up for not getting through all of my content in the last 30-minute episode. We were talking about vCenter in the last episode. We talked about what it is, the requirements, and we started the install process. I was describing all the different ways that we could choose to deploy it, and somehow managed to not get through it in that episode, but it actually kind of worked out well because we ended the episode with the installer running and the little green bar was starting to move across the screen, and that can take a solid 30 minutes, even longer on a slow machine if you don't have a lot of resources attached to it. So I just let that run, and now here we are kicking off this episode where that green bar has finally made it to the other side, and we're ready to continue on working with vCenter, actually getting in there and using it. So let's just dive right in and take a look at it. So here I've got our server. This is exactly as it was left. When that green bar reaches the end of the screen, you get this little pop-up. And this basically just tells me the setup is completed. And it's telling me about some post-installation steps, things that I should do next. Like it's warning me that we're in evaluation mode. This vCenter server will run for 2 months. And after it hits that 60-day mark, it's going to stop letting you log in. It's going to stop letting you manage your servers, and everything's going to kind of freeze. So that's not so good. See how it says all hosts will be disconnected from the vCenter server. So it actually tells the hosts to stop reporting back to us. So if I then go and buy a license, I've got to go and rejoin all those hosts, and that's not exactly a lot of fun. So we definitely want to make sure we update that license key. And then it's telling us that we can use the vSphere web client to manage the vCenter server, and they give us a link right down here to launch it. Right? Now, don't be misled. That button is really big and it looks awfully tempting, and I just want to click on it and get into that server. They're telling me my username right here, administrator at vsphere.local. I want to click that link. The problem is I'm on a server. I'm on Windows Server 2012 R2, and the default web browser is Internet Explorer. That's not a problem. But Internet Explorer running on a server is running in what's called enhanced security mode. And so IESC, something like that, Internet Explorer Enhanced Security, something or another. Anyhow, some security mumbo jumbo that Microsoft puts in place that makes basically nothing work in the web browser. And that's a good thing from a security perspective. I don't need to be going and browsing websites and running applications. But what it does mean is if I try and launch this, well, here, let's do it. We'll throw caution to the wind. So I'm going to go ahead and launch it. That when you browse to connect to it, I'll just go ahead and let it connect. I'm going to get a certificate warning, right? Because that's self-signed certificate. I'll go ahead and continue on it. You can stop warning me. Come on, you can do it. And I'll go ahead and I'll add it to my trusted sites because I'm very trusting. And we'll see that's not actually going to matter here in a second. Because as soon as I get there, what's it going to tell me? I really need Adobe Flash Player version 11.5 or greater. Now, we don't actually have to have Adobe Flash because it can use HTML5 too. But it tries Flash first, and if it fails, then it flips over to HTML5. And in this case, it never even gets the chance to do that flip over because it tries Flash and fails. So then, what does it try to do? It tries to launch a local app on our system to be able to fire up the App Store to load the missing component, which doesn't work if I allow it. It's just going to pop this thing up. No apps are installed to launch this type of link, and things aren't going to work. So in general, this is pretty broken, right? Even if I try and log in, let's see if it'll even let me log in. So I'm going to punch in administrator at vsphere.local, and I'll punch in my password. And let's see if it'll even let us do that. So I'm going to try and log in, and yeah, so now I'm logged in. Wonderful. So it didn't quite work out well for me, right? So don't try and get connected to vSphere or vCenter from the server itself. And if you're running the appliance, it's a Linux box with no GUI anyway, so that's not going to happen. But if you bring up your own Windows box, that temptation is there. So just don't even bother, and just ignore that nice big tempting button. I'm going to hit finish and know that I've now got a vCenter server fired up and running right here. I'm just going to put it in the back of my mind and forget about it and go to my desktop. Because on my desktop, I can run Internet Explorer and things are going to work out great. Now, if I connect to vCenter, there's 2 ways that I can connect. There's the native client, and there's the web client. And I said it in the last episode, the web client is fully featured. You're going to have access to everything you need via the web client. If you do the native client, you get like a subset of features. So I very rarely use the native client, but it is there. You can use it if you want to. There's times where you might need it in a pinch. If something breaks in the web client, you can try it. But because there's so much stuff missing that I almost always go to the web client. So on my client here, this is a Windows 10 machine, and I installed the native client on it in the ESXi episode because we used it to connect directly to an ESX box without vCenter. Well, I can use this client to connect to vCenter too. It doesn't have to connect directly to an ESX box. So when I run that native client, I get the little pop-up that asks me for the IP address of the server I'm connecting to. And last time I put the IP address of an ESX box, but I could put the host name or IP address of my vCenter server, assuming it ever comes up. There we go. So we can see from the last episode where I put in that IP address, and see how it says up here, I can, if I want to manage multiple hosts, enter the IP address or name of a vCenter server. So instead of connecting to a host, I can connect to vCenter. So I can punch in that server. Now, if I punch it in by IP, it's going to flip it to a name before it's all said and done. If I put it in as a name, it stays that way. So we usually use the fully qualified name, but I can punch in an IP if I want here and put in that administrator at vsphere.local and the password that I set. All right, so this is the native client. This is not the web interface. And I'm going to log in, and it's going to reach out to that server, and I'll probably get a certificate warning. Yep, there it is. I'm going to go ahead and choose to install the certificate so I don't get this over and over again. And I'll ignore the warning, throw caution to the wind. And then once we're connected, we'll see our vCenter deployment. Now, the vCenter deployment is not going to be spectacular. Don't expect to get blown away, because we're not even managing one single host. And so vCenter that's not managing anything is pretty boring. We're going to need to add some stuff to it. But I just want to show you the native interface, because then I'm going to flip right over to the client, the web client. Now, it is taking a moment. If you look down here, it is actually working, loading the main form, displaying the main form, and then there it is. Okay, so now I'm in the native client, and well, it's warning me about my evaluation. Let me clear that. It doesn't look that much different than the native client did when I connected to ESX. The difference is I see my vCenter server here, and if I was managing hosts, I'd see them underneath it. I could see more than one ESX server at the same time. When I use the native client and I pointed it right to one server, I can only manage that one server. vCenter is what allows me to manage more. And so now I've got it, and if I go to my home screen, I see a lot more than when I just connected to an ESX box. When I connected to an ESX box, what did I have here? When I came into the main screen, I had inventory, but just for that one host. And I had administration, just roles and licensing. But now that I'm connected to vCenter, I have a ton more. I've got my vCenter server settings, vCenter Solutions Manager, storage providers, networking, data stores, VMs and templates, all sorts of craziness. And now I can start to administer that system. So I can do it right here from the native client if I want. Or I can use the web client. Now, I'll be honest with you guys, the native client is a little faster. And it looks a little nicer. It's a little more modern, so that a lot of people like it, but it's not as full-featured. And so a lot of times I'll jump to that web client instead. And if I want to do that, I can just fire up a web browser, and I can browse that server that I want to connect to. Now, in the background, let me just point out this while my browser is launching. I typed in an IP to connect to the server, and look up here. See how it changed it to the name, right? It flips over to a name. So you need to have that fully qualified domain name in there. That was one of the last things I did in the last episode, was I created a DNS record for my server so I could find it. That's important. It's doubly important in a web browser, because when I browse to that server, when I browse to 192.168.0.200 is my server. When I browse to that server, well, it flips secure, so let me authorize that certificate. And then I get this page right here asking me, do I want to log in to the vSphere web client, which is exactly what I want. And so now when I go to connect to that, it's got an IP address up here. So see, I see that IP address, but as soon as I go to log in, it's going to flip, and I'm going to see a domain name instead. And so if I don't have that, it'll fail to connect. This is the very first time that I've launched the web client from here, and so it's taking a moment. Every time I launch in the future, it'll cache a lot of this data. But remember, when I launched on the server, what did I get? I got that I was missing Adobe Flash, and I got that it wanted to launch an external application. This one wants to launch an external application too. I can allow it, but it's not going to actually do anything. It's trying to link to the native client if you've got it, and so it's just going to fail. I'm going to ignore that. But back here, it's not complaining about Flash anymore. Why is that? Well, it saw that I didn't have Flash, and now it's flipping and it's using HTML5 and the other native functions in the browsers. It's able to do that because we've got the security level correct. So now I can log in as administrator at vsphere.local, and I'll punch in my password, and we'll get logged in. Now, I'm logging in as administrator at vsphere.local. That's because I accepted the defaults during the install. You might have changed that. So if you had a different single sign-on domain, you'd need to provide that. If you gave a different username, well, actually it doesn't let you give a different username at that point. We'll see where we can create users here in a little bit. All right, it's trying to open an app again. Let me just cancel that. So it's trying to link up with a native client, and we don't necessarily need that. We can do it all from the web. So now it's going to pull up the web client, and what you'll see is it looks very similar to the native client, but it's structured a little bit different. But what's important is it's got all the various features in it, so we'll be able to manage that server. So when I come into it, over here on the left side, I have my navigator, and you'll see that I've got home, inventory, hosts and clusters, policies and profiles, vRealize orchestrator. That's one of the big differences. If I go to the native client doesn't support plugins. So it's got just the vCenter tools in it, and that's it. But the web client supports plugins. And so it can manage not just vCenter, but all of VMware's other products. And so I've got the hybrid cloud manager for if I have vCloud. I've got the vRealize orchestrator if I've got that in place. If you deploy VMware Horizon, you can get the Horizon management tools added on here. And so now you have one place to go. It's another reason why I prefer the web client over the desktop client is the plug-in extensibility. You can add a ton of stuff to it. In fact, a lot of it adds it by itself. I didn't add vRealize orchestrator. I didn't even install it, but it's already got the plug-in in there. So if I ever do deploy it, it'll be ready and available. So this is the web client, and it's probably where you're going to spend the most of your time as a VMware admin. In fact, for the whole rest of this series, get used to this screen. This is where we're going to spend pretty much all of our time. There is a lot to do in here, and it's all done right here via our web browser, so kind of convenient. Now, as far as initial setup, there's a few things that I need to worry about. One of the big things is my license. So I've got this nice big yellow bar up top telling me there are vCenter server systems with expired or expiring licenses in your inventory. I'm in an eval, so I've got 60 days. That means I'm set to expire. I'm going to expire in only 2 months, so that's not good. I need to get in there and put a license in for it. You can manage your license right here. If you click that link, it'll take you to the licensing screen, and in the licensing screen, you can view what licenses you have. I don't have any. Now, you can add licenses in here, not just vCenter, but ESX license also. And that way, if I ever deploy an ESX host and it boots up in eval mode, I don't have to type in a license. I can just assign it from right here. And that's really useful because you might have one license that has 5 or 10 activations in it. And so you could use that one license over and over again, and you can keep track of how it's been used right here. And
vSphere will push out that activation to your ESX hosts and basically kind of automate the process. I guess it's not completely automated.
Yeah, it's pretty darn close, right? With your host, all you have to really do is add your host in, and then everything else you do from here, and so it's basically automated. But we'd go in here and add it, and again, just like in the last episode, I'd love to show it to you guys, but it always displays the license key on the screen. So I've got valid keys, but if I put them in here, they're not going to be valid for long. But you just hit the little plus sign there, and you type in your keys. And the keys are, if I remember right, they're like 25 digits, and so they'll have, just a bunch of letters and numbers that are kind of laid out like that. And so you just paste it in, and you can do more than one, so you just punch them all in here over and over again, each one. You can copy and paste them right out of your email or out of your, if you go to my.vmware.com, you'll have all your licenses right there. You can copy and paste them. And when you throw them in there, it's going to load them in, and now you can deploy them out to your clients and attach them as you need it, right? So like if I hit next, well, those are all invalid, so it's not too happy about it. I'll just cancel that. But they'll all show up right here in the list, and you can start attaching them to host. It's kind of cool because you can actually yank back a license and attach it to another host. So if you're about to decommission an ESX box, maybe it's running the latest version of ESX, but it's older hardware. And so you buy new hardware. You could yank your license off of one and reattach it to another. It's nice to be able to move that as long as the license isn't expired, right? That would be a problem. So I definitely want to do that, get my licenses squared away before I put a ton of effort and work into my server. Otherwise, I'm gonna regret it. But assuming that we're good, then we can jump back to our home. Now, navigating inside of the vCenter screen is a little bit quirky because there's several different ways to navigate. The navigation bar over here is what we're normally going to use. You've got this button that's really like a breadcrumb trail, because when you navigate in, you might go several layers deep in some of these things as you navigate in, so that'll start to change, and you can go backwards and forwards based on where you're at in the hierarchy. You can also view a little history to pull up your most recent location. So it's very similar to what you do in a web browser anyway, but being done natively through the interface. All right? So that's one way to navigate. Also, you've always got a home button right here, and when you float over the home button, you get all the primary categories that you can jump around into. Okay? So for example, I'm actually in administration, and under administration, I'm in licensing, right, is what I'm looking at right now. Or actually, I've managed to jump to users. So if I go up here to home, I could go to administration, and it'll take me right here to the first tool on the screen, and then I can jump down to licenses. So it makes it pretty easy to navigate and jump around to these things, but it does get a little bit confusing because you have a lot of duplicate places. And the reason you have the duplicate places is you can customize this stuff. See how this has like a little pin on it right there, like a thumbtack? If you click that thumbtack, see how it just compressed the navigator to take less space on the screen? You can do the same thing over here with like alarms and work in progress. Now, I encourage you not to do that with these two because they each serve a particular purpose. When you're dealing with the native client, you're connected, you're managing the system, you're the only person. But vCenter allows centralized management of your entire environment. And if you've got 10 network admins, all 10 of them might be logged in and working at one time. And you don't want to step on each other's toes. So you get alarms, which are errors on the system, and all of you will see it. So you see it, you know something's going on, you can jump in and deal with it. I've got a health alarm because of my license, right? We've already seen the alarm. So everybody sees it, and any one of us can go in there and correct it. Down at the bottom, I see work in progress, though. These are tasks that are running. Remember, in the native client, let me see if I still have that. There. Down in the native client, we have recent tasks, and we can see what's going on the system. In the web one, it's all over here, work in progress. And so I can see tasks that are running right now. So if 10 people are logged in, I can see what it is that they're doing, if they're actually doing anything. If they're just looking, it doesn't show up. And then when it's complete, it'll show up down here under recent tasks as ones that are done. They'll either show as completed or failed, and we'll be able to find out why. But we all see it. It's a combined environment. So it makes it where you can have multiple people working, but not stepping on each other's toes.
So basically, Don, configure your workspace the way you want, as much real estate as you want or as little real estate, but leave those two panes where they are as a best practice.
For me, the navigator I almost always shrink, because I actually don't use the navigator all that much because I'm typically using that home button up top that lets me navigate. But the navigator is nice to have it when you're navigating. Having it minimized, I didn't show you guys, having it minimized like this, when you mouse over it and click, it just pops out. And so you've got navigation when you need it, and then when you don't need it, you just click and it goes away again. Or anytime you click a link, it'll automatically go away. So it's out of the way when you don't need it, right? If you've got a 4K screen with an insane resolution set, you don't care, you got tons of real estate. But as I get older, I just can't read the screens as well as I used to. I need to have a bigger font. I want to have this stuff with more room on the screen. And your web browser zoom function works, but you start running out of space really quick. So I almost always collapse the navigator and the recent tasks down at the bottom. Okay, recent tasks are stuff that are done, and I don't normally care about stuff that's already done unless it errored out, right? And so I'll hit the little tack on that one to collapse it down, and now I got a ton of room, right? And so each of these are kind of laid out, and you've got it in a way that takes up a little less space. You get a little more room. And then, like, alarms may be more important to me than work in progress, and so you can always float over the middle bar and readjust the sizes there to give a little more room to one or the other, and I can make it so that my head covers it perfectly, and then I don't know anybody's working. So you get that in place. It's up to you to customize it to your needs. All right, it is a pretty flexible environment that works out pretty well. If you get rid of a screen, so for example, let's just say by accident, well, let me do the navigator, but alarms. All right, see how alarms has an X? I can actually get rid of alarms, and now it's gone. And I'm like, oh no, those are alarms. Those are kind of important. I want to add alarms back. How do I add it back? Well, there's not like a quick, easy way to do it right here from this screen. But if you go up top to your username and click on your username, you'll see layout settings right there. And you can go into layout settings, and now you can turn alarms back on. There's not a whole lot to do here. I can turn alarms on, I can turn recent tasks on or off, and I can reset to the default layout. So if I've messed with it, I can just hit reset to default layout, and it'll put it back to the way that it's supposed to be. And so it's going to reload, and now it's back to that way. Even the navigator is no longer unpinned. It's pinned back to where it should be. So you really can't screw it up. You can put it back to the way that you want it to be. And this is tracked individually per user. So if you have your own user account, then you set it the way you want, and it's ready to rock. So the UI is pretty convenient. And for me, this is where I go. I very rarely launch the native client. I almost entirely work here. Even though the native client's a little bit more responsive, a little faster, I still like the web client. It's got all the features I need, and it's just right in the web browser.
Well, Don, thank you for showing us how to get vCenter up and running. Does look like we're getting a little bit close to the end, but do you got some additional information you want to throw in there?
I'm going to push this one, Wes, because while technically we have a vCenter up, it's not doing anything. And so to really see how it works, we need to get at least one host in. So I'm going to import a host into this thing so we can get it managed. And this is kind of an initial step to use vCenter. vCenter is useless if you have no host attached to it. I've got a host sitting right over here that we connected to directly earlier, but let's add it into vCenter and get a chance to see it. I'm going to throw the show time limit to the winds. So what we're going to do is the very first thing that I need to do is create a data center. Inside of vCenter, you can have more than one data center, but you have to have at least one data center to put a single host in. So for each server room that you have out there in the wild, you might have a disaster recovery and a main and whatever, you need to create a data center. So I'm going to create my first one. And we do that by going under hosts and clusters. So I hit my home button, and then under home, I'm going to hosts and clusters, actually in the inventories category. When you read textbooks and the help documents from VMware, it gets a little confusing because it'll say like, navigate to home, inventories, host and clusters. And you look at it and you're like, well, I go to home and there's host and clusters. Where the heck is inventories? And it's just a category name. It's not actually something you click on, but you have these different categories. Here's administration and so on. I want host and clusters. And when I go to host and clusters, I'm going to see an internal error. So my little Flash player is not too happy. So let me reload that real quick. And I guess I actually did load Flash. I thought it was using HTML5 there. So I guess it flipped over to Flash for some reason. But let me let that reload. And once I get back in there, I can jump in and I'm going to create that first data center. It actually will not let you import a host while you don't have a data center. So I see my vCenter server right here, winserver01.lab.itpro.tv, and there's no button here for adding a host or anything, right? So I need to add a data center. And when you come in here, you can just right-click on the server, and this pulls up the action screen. And so you'll see all these different actions. And if you work with VCP, not VCP, but if you did your VCP 5.5, or if you've been working with vSphere 5.5 or earlier, there used to be your actions, and then there was an all actions link where other stuff was hidden. In vSphere 6, they've done a lot better of a job of putting all the actions you need right here, so we don't have that kind of double tier, which is super annoying. But I've got new data center right here, and that's what I want. There's no new host, just new data center. So I'm going to add a data center, and I'll leave it at the default name of data center, but you might call this home office, disaster recovery, Gainesville, Orlando, whatever it is based on where that data center is, whatever name it is that you use to identify your data center. So I'm just going to create one called data center. And now that's going to update, and there it is. And under recent tasks, I can see where I've got to create data center. It actually appeared under my work in progress for a moment, and then jumped down here when it was done. Now I can go to data center, and under data center, there's add a host, right? It's telling me I need to come in and add a host. And if I scroll down, I've got add a host right there. Or I can just right click and you've got add a host, right? You can also add clusters. We'll talk about that later, but I'm going to add a host for right now. And so when I go to add a host, it's going to ask for a host name or IP address. And so I'll punch in the IP address of that host that we brought up in the other show. All right, and it's going to ask where to put it. Now, I've only got one data center, so there's nowhere else for me to put it. It's just going to show up there. But if I had more than one data center, I could pick and say where that one actually resides. And then the type will be automatically detected. ESXi is pretty much what we're going to manage these days. But if you click on the information bubble, you'll see where it'll actually still manage things like GSX servers, even though you really shouldn't have those anymore, as well as the vCenter gateway you might need to connect to if you've got proxied connections to your other data center. All right, I'm going to get next. It does need a username and a password to manage that system, so I'll punch in the root account that we set up during the install. And now it's going to reach out. Here's that certificate again. I need to verify I am connected to the right host. And now it's identified it and it's going to be ready to attach it. Now my system doesn't have a license, and so on the next screen, it's going to offer for me to attach a license. So if I had preloaded licenses like we saw earlier, I could pick the license to give this host and it'll automatically license it for me, all taken care of. Or I can stick with the eval license, which is exactly what I'm going to do. So I've got 60 days. Then lockdown mode. What is lockdown mode? Well, when we set up that host, where is that thing? Here. If somebody goes to the console of the host and they sit down at the machine, they get this screen. There's not much they can do, but there are some things. They can reset the network configuration. So right down here, they've got press F2 to customize the system or view logs. They've also got press F12 to shut down and restart. You could actually do stuff to the system right from here. And I can't remember that there is a secret keystroke sequence that you can punch in to actually get to the shell from here, and it's a weird series of keys. So there's stuff that you could do right here from the console. Well, if we're connected to vCenter, we might not want that. And so in vCenter, we can choose to put it into strict lockdown mode. This host is accessible only through vCenter server. You cannot do anything through the direct console UI. On the exam, sometimes they'll write that as DC UI, so be familiar with that, but the direct console UI. And it even says the direct console UI service is stopped. It stops that service, and now you just get a blank screen on the host. The only way to manage it is here through vCenter. Now, what happens if vCenter fails? Well, then you're screwed. You got to get your vCenter server back up, otherwise you can no longer administer that host, right? So you might not be ready to go that crazy. You might want to go normal. The host is accessible only through the local console or vCenter server. What does that mean? Well, it means the console still works, but SSH doesn't. It turns off. I turned on SSH earlier, it'll turn that off. So the only way to manage it would be through that console. So if I want to go crazy, I'm going to go strict. Let's go all out. And it's warning me, be careful. You know, the only way to do it is going to be through the vCenter server, and I'm okay with that. I'll do it. So we're going to go crazy. We can always turn this off later if I do need to manage it, but that means I need vCenter running to be able to do it. If I lose vCenter, I can't manage that host anymore. All right, so we're going to hit next on that, and now it's asking me to double check that data center location. I have a chance to change my mind if I want to pick a different data center, and that's all it needs. We can finish that up, and it's going to import that host. Now, when it imports the host, it's going to add it to my UI, and it's going to put it in lockdown mode. So it's doing that right now, and I can see down here, add a standalone host is coming into data center. It's 80% complete, and it's turning along. So I see that action that's going on, and now it's completed. And once it's completed, my screen will refresh, and now when I expand out data center, there's my host. Okay, now my host has a warning on it. I don't know what that warning is. And, oh, licensing. A good old licensing warning has popped back up again. So we do have that, and I can look under my alerts here to see it. But basically, we can pull our summary on it. It's reaching out and connecting to that machine, and here, oh, it's not licensing. This one, quick stats are not up to date. It'll update those for me. And SSH for the host has been enabled, so it's warning me about that. I guess lockdown mode hasn't applied yet, so I've got that warning. I'll suppress the warning. It's going to fix it for me automatically thanks to lockdown mode, so we just give it time. But basically, I'm now managing it. If I jump over to that host, here's the host, and the screen, oh, it actually hasn't updated yet, has it? So it will, because it hasn't applied the disabling SSH. So eventually it will apply. It's pushing out what's called a host profile. And when that applies, it's going to put it in lockdown mode and stop me from being able to administer things. I'll still see some information here, but I won't actually be able to do anything from the host. But now I've got it created. Now is when the real fun happens. Now vCenter is actually doing something. It's got a host to manage. I can set up profiles and security settings and push it. I can create virtual machines and start to deploy them. I can create templates. Now vCenter is actually useful. If I go back to the home page, I can go to host and clusters, or I can go to VMs and templates now, and I'll start to see my virtual machines listed by data center. And I can come in and I can say, all right, here's my data center. I want to create a new virtual machine. And I can create the virtual machine in that data center and pick which host it's going to reside on and so on. So as you go through, you'll see where you pick who that host is, where it's actually going to reside. I can start to define network settings. I can do all the management stuff we need to do, all right here from one place. vCenter becomes the one place you go to manage your entire environment.
And I can tell you, I'm glad I didn't cut you off, because it's nice when you can actually see what it's doing there. And since we're throwing out all the rules on this one as far as the time clock goes, I wouldn't be doing you or our viewers any justice without saying, before we sign out, do you have any additional words?
That's about it, and only because I know we're going to be spending a whole heck of a lot of time in vCenter through the whole rest of this series, so we are going to see a lot more of it, believe you me.
All right, well, we thank you, Don, and we thank you, the viewer, for watching. Signing out for IT Pro TV, I've been your host, Wes Bryan.
And I'm Don Pizzette.
And we'll see you next time.